Yeah.
Okay. On me, please go ahead. Thank you. Thank you everyone for giving us the time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. Good evening. Thanks so much, Shahinara, for opening us up. Yeah, the land acknowledgement. Out of deep respect for Indigenous peoples in Canada, we wish to acknowledge this land we are standing on. Holding this virtual event tonight is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Adonusani, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that very well, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuits, and Métis people. I also acknowledge that Toronto is also governed by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation tells us that Treaty 13, or the Toronto Purchase, was made unjustly and without their consent. It is important for us to honor these truths and acknowledge the ongoing genocide of Indigenous peoples in Canada. We gather today on Stony land and at the displacement of Indigenous peoples. Living on this territory makes all people in Toronto treaty peoples. Those who come as settlers or immigrants of this generation or earlier generations, as well as those brought involuntarily as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. As we meet here today, we live in the contradictions of being treaty peoples in the midst of broken treaties and persistent inaction. Today, this meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across the Torto Island, and we're thankful and grateful to have the opportunity to live, work, learn, gather, and to play in this community on this traditional lands. And we honor the nations who have always cared for these lands, waters, and air, and continue to do so today. As an immigrant and a newcomer, I understand my responsibility. My responsibility is to continue to learn the history of Indigenous people, the heavy impacts of colonization, and to build stronger relationships with Indigenous people. Having learned that for more than 100 years, Canadian authorities forcibly separated thousands of Indigenous children from their families and made them attend residential schools, which aim to sever Indigenous family and cultural ties and assimilate the children into white Canadian society. I join all immigrants and newcomers present here tonight to continue to reflect and not grieve with Indigenous people for the atrocity committed against them, including the residential school system. That history cannot be overlooked or forgotten, and we must continue to strive for reconciliation. This is what healing is all about. Let us therefore continue to stand in solidarity with Indigenous people as allies and collaborators in our shared struggles for freedom and justice as settlers committed to honoring Indigenous rights and their title and ensuring that Indigenous legal orders can exist side by side with the Canadian one. This is what mutual aid is all about. We ask that as we do this, our lives and choices will contribute to justice, healing, and peace for the land and our communities. Thank you. I will pass it off to Shahinara to take us further in this event tonight. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Funmi. Can I have the next slide, please? Yes, so our meeting agenda today at 6 p.m. as you've seen, we welcomed you all. Thanks for joining. And then we have land acknowledgement. We are doing agenda review right now and our meeting objectives. And then we'll go through at 6:10. We are working together we have collective agreement, collective protocols, supporting listening room, Zoom overview, and translation lines. Then 6:15, we have opening statements from myself and Phils, our amazing moderator. And then 6:25, we have panel discussion. And after that, we have 7:20 p.m., we have breakout groups. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah, so our meeting objective, building collective knowledge, Indigenous communities and the Canadian state, and our building relationships, and then building understanding, and we would like to learn how to build solidarity with Indigenous communities. That's our event objectives tonight, and we'll meet amazing leaders. Thank you. And then I would like to pass it on to Funmi.
Yeah, thank you so much, my sister. Yeah, our collective agreement this evening, would like to state that our group is dedicated to creating an inclusive environment for all. Our meetings will build accessible and welcoming spaces for people of all races, genders, classes, abilities, ages, cultures, religions, and sexualities. We will not tolerate harassment of any form, including but not limited to racism, classism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, or any other oppressive language and behavior. If you witness or experience harassment, please inform a member of the organizing team. We have a mark by star. You'll see asterisk at the beginning of their names. I would like to also inform you that we will also be offering a breakout peer support space with a supportive listener for anyone who would like space to process any challenges during this event tonight. Next slide, please. Yeah. Let us know that, okay, our collective the agreement, one diva, one mic, that is one person speaks at a time. Let us know that we should make space and take space. That is making room for other people. You can as well say whoops and genuinely apologize for the ways your intention did not match your impact, or ouch, if someone says something that hurts. Let's be mindful of time. No one knows everything, but together we know a lot. Awareness of power and privilege. Let's be patient and respect one another. Private messages are recorded in final chat transcript. So let's be informed, and let us know that this session will be recorded. If you are not comfortable with putting your camera on, you can put it off. Thank you. The next slide, please. Please let us be informed that there is translation services for this program tonight. We have one. In Arabic, we have in Arabic and French languages. For Arabic, please call +1 647 733 1185. Again, I repeat, the translation service for Arabic is, the call number is +1 647 733 1185. And the PIN for that is 920 766 168. I repeat, 920 766 168. And for the French translation, please call +1 647-735-2082. I repeat, for French translation, please call +647-735-2082. And the pin for the French for that line is 679-942-925. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. To take us further this evening, I will be inviting Shahinara for our opening statement. Shahinara is my colleague. She's an amazing community organizer. She has been a resident of Regent Park since 2010. Our focus has been on empowerment and economic development of diverse women in the community. She's an active, she has been actively supporting vulnerable families who are experiencing isolation and socio-economic challenges during the pandemic. Please, folks, please join me to welcome Shahinara. Thank you. Shahinara, over to you. You have the floor now.
Thank you, Funmi, for introducing me, and welcome everyone. My name is Shahinara Khandakar. I am an immigrant South Asian Muslim woman. I work as a mutual aid coordinator for the Neighborhood Port Stew project for the Downtown East Cluster. I'm so proud to be part of this great event, building collective knowledge of Indigenous communities and the Canadian state. I'm a settler here on Toronto's Island, and I acknowledge that I'm getting benefit from this land. As an immigrant, I'm living here with my family and working on the land of many Indigenous people who lived here before us. We must acknowledge that we are occupying their lands. As a newcomer, when I came to Canada in 2010, I had no idea about Indigenous communities in Canada, especially about their challenges. And before coming to Canada, I heard that Canada is such a peaceful place to live and a country of opportunities where people enjoy their lives with dignity. But when I settled here, I found my understanding about Canada was not true. Here I have seen poverty and inequalities exist. I have seen people experiencing homelessness, addictions, and mental health crises. Women, especially racialized and Indigenous and LGBTQ plus community members, experiences violence. Newcomers and immigrants are experiencing systemic discrimination in accessing good jobs. Most importantly, what shocked me was that Indigenous peoples living in reserves do not have access to safe drinking water, education, and health care. Indigenous and Black children and youth represent most in the foster care and in the criminal justice system. I thought Canada is a developed country, so there will be no issues that happen to the so-called developing or underdeveloped countries. The most frustrating thing was when I started to learn about the history and persistence of Canadian genocide and the anti-colonial history of Indigenous peoples and their struggles. I didn't have any idea, or we didn't receive any kind of state orientation, or there wasn't any chapter about Indigenous communities in Canada in our citizenship book. And I did not have relationship with Indigenous peoples. Also, I haven't seen any curriculum that related to the Indigenous communities in my daughter's elementary school. So I did not see news or social media posts about Indigenous peoples that much until from 2015-16. Also, when I studied the social service program in George Brown College and started working with the community and nonprofit organization, I came to experience and learn that there is ignorance about Indigenous peoples and the struggles they face. However, many of these struggles are shared by newcomers, even if it is in different social conditions. I have my responsibility to learn more about the history and persistence of Canadian genocide and the anti-colonial history of Indigenous peoples and their struggles. And so I need to educate myself. I'll work to be very aware and respectful of Indigenous communities and their cultural worldviews. Also, I recognize that learning and unlearning is not enough. And so I'll work to participate in collective actions that support and are led by Indigenous communities. As a mutual aid coordinator and a community outreach worker at the neighborhood group, I'll try to get connect with as many newcomers as I can. And through building these connections, I can begin to organize solidarity initiatives with Indigenous community members so that not only just myself, but my entire network can be better allies and co-collaborators in our shared struggles for freedom and justice, even though we come as settlers. Thank you, everyone. Next slide, please. Now I will hand over to Field, and Field Vargomoon is a passionate community organizer, caretaker, and artist who loves bringing community together and making a witnessing space for miracles. They can be found biking around Toronto at all hours, saying hi to trees and dancing while sipping clean water. Now I would like to hand it over to Field, our amazing moderator tonight. Thank you, Field.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Shahinara and Fumi, for opening us up in such a good way and for sharing your experience interacting with the Canadian state so far and how you've started to build your relationships with Indigenous communities. I am moderating this panel because they asked me to really graciously, and I'm so honored to be here. My background is that my mom was a newcomer here 20 years ago, and she's been serving the newcomer community ever since. She works at Wood Green, and if any of you live in the East End and have kids, she has definitely helped raise your kids. And my dad's family is Haudenosaunee. They're Mohawk from Six Nations, and I personally, in my own family, feel the impacts of residential school and everything else that has happened. So that's where I come from. And I would like to open us up with gratitude. It's traditional for any Haudenosaunee gathering to start with the Thanksgiving address. Usually it takes at least 20 minutes because you want to acknowledge every single relationship that impacts our lives. You'll see linked in the chat to a really contemporary form of Thanksgiving address done by my favorite Haudenosaunee artist, Scott Winati. So in this, she goes through everything and you can look at it yourself on your own time, and it's a video. It's really fun and easy to look at. Right now, I would just like to thank and acknowledge all of our ancestors that have helped us be here, and all of our living creatures that we share this earth with. Like, I was just like feeding some pigeons with my cousins earlier today. That was pretty great. And we went and looked at the lake and all the fish that live there and keep the waters clean, and all the trees that grow around here and give us shade and food and fresh air, and the birds that fill the air with beautiful song and help keep us company. And I would also like to thank the internet and our laptops and how we can hear each other even though we can't be in person with each other right now. And I also want to thank my earrings. These I got from Pacha Arts, and they're made out of porcupine quills, and this is made by ResCat, and it's stained glass. And this I made out of just medicines that I found around, including porcupine quills and red willow, which really helps if you have a headache. So I am really grateful that Fumi and Shahinara already outlined how they've experienced Indigenous peoples being treated here on our own land. As I said, my grandma's Haudenosaunee, so we are in her traditional territories right now, along with the Anishinaabe and the Wendat, and also the Mississaugas of the Credit, and I think the Chippewas. In the chat, you should see linked to the National Inquiry for Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls. It was done as one of the calls to action, and thousands of families across the whole continent were interviewed by a panel, or not a panel, by a council of mostly Indigenous women. So they had a safe space to finally tell their stories. Most of these stories of how they've lost family members, which is at a way statistically higher rate than any other population in this country. And most of these families had never talked about that before and just had to hold that themselves until this national inquiry was done. And the fact that it exists in itself is really healing. Please take the time to read it and feel the strength and love of our communities and how we can keep going so strongly with everything that's been happening. Also linked in the chat, you should find the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. There's a whole report along with that too. The calls to action are specifically what our communities have asked the government to implement, and a lot of them are really simple. There's just over 100, 160, and some of them are so simple. And this was released almost a decade ago, and most of them haven't been done yet. So just take a read through and just see the accountability that the Canadian state has had. And also linked in the chat, you will see UNDRIP. I personally think it's kind of weird that UNDRIP even exists, that we have to label human rights like that. And reading through it was really eye-opening to just how dehumanized Indigenous people across the whole world, not even just here, are treated. So that's the background that this conversation is happening with. I would love to introduce the speakers now, because a lot of them are my dear, dear friends who are really just wonderful people, full of love and laughter. If someone could switch it to the next slide. Yes, please welcome the speakers. Our first speaker is Yolanda Brito. And I forgot to ask how your people's name is pronounced. So I hope you say that when you introduce yourself. From the Carib people, graduated in international studies with specializations in foreign policy and incorporating mathematical models in decision-making processes. Former university professor on the topics of geopolitics, international relations, and human history. And I'm really excited to meet you. I know you're Seb's friend, and I've just heard so much about you.
I'll jump into translate. ¿Entendiste eso? Yolanda, ¿quiere comenzar o quiere que yo haga la traducción rapidito? Just make sure Yolanda is here. Teresa, can you make Yolanda co-host? She probably can't unmute right now. Ok, ahora creo que puedes hablar y poner el video, Yolanda.
¿Ya? ¿Me
Ok.
escuchas ahí?
Sí, sí, yo te escucho. Entonces, Field, la moderadora, estaba preguntando cómo se dice el nombre de tu pueblo, cómo se lo pronuncia.
Cari, no.
Carib.
So that's how you say the name of...
Dice acá, es gutural, like a French. ¿Es Cari?
Cari.
No. Cari? No.
Carib, no.
Yeah. But the French invented the word Caribbean. It is a French invention. Well,
Invented a lot of
yeah.
words.
Yeah, the first is a Yotso Apu Kurukuro. It is a salutation from my people for the Caribbean. It is my regard from my heart to your heart. It's a from my love to your love. It's a respectful salutation from my people. Thank you for inviting me tonight. I will use the translation on Sebastian and on one my friend here, and on also maybe Ana Teresa, maybe in the next. Voy a seguir hablando en español.
Ok, aquí estoy.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to hear so many
cuando está-
languages.
Yeah, this is a many languages, it's a Tkaronto.
Mhm.
Yeah, multicultural. Cuando estamos hablando de solidaridad, es un concepto que desde los pueblos indígenas siempre se ha manejado como algo diferente a la caridad, en cuanto la caridad es vertical y viene de alguien que la da de arriba hacia abajo. La solidaridad siempre implica un respeto y un intercambio recíproco.
Okay, so what Yolanda said was that she's coming from a place of solidarity, and solidarity, it is important in the Indigenous worldview to understand that solidarity is very different from charity, because charity is vertical. It is someone in a position of power giving something to people, quote unquote, beneath them, whereas solidarity speaks to the exchange and the mutual aid that takes place when people unite together and when they work together.
Claro. La realidad, la que estábamos hablando aquí de las escuelas residenciales y todo eso, ya nosotros teníamos conocimiento como indígenas precisamente porque hay una comunicación muy cercana desde antes de 1992.
So Yolanda was saying that the situation with the residential schools in Canada, her people have known about for a very long time, because for many, many decades, there has actually been communications and exchanges, even prior to the internet, between her Indigenous community and Indigenous communities in Canada. So the entire time she was able to be plugged in, and people in her community were able to be plugged in on what was going on with residential schools and the atrocities that were being committed to the Indigenous peoples.
Sí, en 1990 hubo una reunión en América Latina precisamente entre líderes indígenas para discutir temas que nos eran comunes.
So in 1990, there was a reunion or a gathering between various Indigenous nations across North and South America. And that gathering was very important because it was a space where Indigenous leaders from these different nations came together to discuss problems, mutual problems that they were facing, even though they were all living under different states and colonial entities.
Y lo interesante de esto es que nuestros problemas son comunes, lo que lo diferencia es que lo hemos vivido en tiempos diferentes.
What was most interesting was that all the problems were largely the same. The only difference was the time that they were experienced. So at different times, different nations had deployed these tactics. However, all the nations knew what the tactics were and related to them, even if they weren't happening at the same time.
Yeah. Y en este caso, al llegar a Canadá como indígena, es mucho más fácil hacer vinculación con otros indígenas de acá.
Because of that, it's really easy as an Indigenous person immigrating to Canada to actually build a relationship with other Indigenous peoples here in Canada. So for Yolanda, that wasn't an issue to meet other Indigenous peoples and to build that kind of relationship and solidarity.
Sí, que es un poco más, es un poco diferente cuando eres un migrante mestizo.
Yeah, it's a bit different than when you're a mestizo immigrant from Latin America.
Porque hay diferentes identidades dentro de América Latina.
Because it's important to remember that there are different identities within Latin America. Mestizo and Indigenous are not the same identity.
Yeah. Y también hay racismo interno. Of course.
And of course, especially within the Mestizo community, there is an internalized racism, especially an internalized colorism and anti-Indigenous racism.
Entonces, al llegar aquí las comunidades para integrarse, tienen que empezar a reconocerse primero, reconocer su identidad.
Yeah,
Cuando los migrantes lleguen acá.
sí, mira, yo creo que estamos terminando la introducción y vamos a hablar con los
Okay.
habladores. Entonces voy a traducir. ¿Puedes repetir otra vez lo que terminaste?
Que al llegar acá como migrantes latinoamericanos no indígenas, es un poco diferente porque hay que hacer énfasis en la propia identidad que todavía no se tiene como latinoamericano.
Right.
No está construida la identidad.
Yeah, so there's like a construction of different identities taking place, right? Where someone who comes here as a non-Indigenous Latin American is constructing a Latin American identity in response to the kind of racism they're facing in the Canadian state. But then Latin American person of Indigenous descent is also facing additional layers of oppression and marginalization by the Canadian state. So, and then I'll pass it back to Field and then it allows to move on to the next speaker, right?
Thank you.
Nalagoa, which is thank you in Mohawk. That was so incredible. And I'm so grateful you are here because we're here to build relationships and connections. And you just brought in a whole family connection right there. And next slide, please. Our next speaker is Shemi Lhamo, and Chemi is a community organizer and activist. And I will read your bio. Chemi is a steering committee member of the International Tibet Network. She is a former U of T Mosaic Fellow and a School of Cities Fellow at the University of Toronto. Chemi has previously served as the CEO/President, Vice President, Equity and Racialized Students Collective Coordinator of the Students' Union at U of T Scarborough, along with the Board of Canadian Tibetan Association of Ontario and SFT Canada. I would love to welcome Chemi. I personally know Chemi as an incredible activist, and it's really amazing to have you here as well.
Thank you, Field. It was a pleasure. Please ignore the bio. That's for the materialistic world that we live in, that I feel the need to have that. However, I just want to say quickly, Tishtile, everybody, today being the winter solstice, the earth turns again towards light, and I wish and may our new year, next year, be illuminated with solidarity and love. Like the year, all things are cyclical, and Indigenous people have thrived here before the nightmares of colonialism, white supremacy, and all the hatred, and will continue to thrive after all of it collapses. And so, coming from stolen land myself, I stand here today, or I'm joining you today, not just as Chemi, a Tibetan girl that has been displaced. I come here with the spirit of my ancestors, the spirit of young Tibetans who lost their lives 60 years ago in 1959 during the annexation and occupation of my country, and the spirit of the Tibetans that till this day who are getting imprisoned and killed for simply singing their national anthem or having the national flag. And so I don't know if this is the time for me to do any comments, but I know we have a robust discussion later on. I'd be happy to have join you folks there. I'll keep it short.
Now go with Chemi. Yes, we're going to have many discussions in a couple minutes. Next slide, please. Our next speaker is Gwen. Gwen is an Innu-English identifying woman who, after not having connections to Indigenous relations, sought out community in the city of Tkaronto and educated herself on colonialism of Indigenous people within Canada and the negative long-term effects that the government of Canada continues to perpetuate to this day. Gwen is also one of my childhood friends, and it's so amazing to get to host this space with somebody I grew up with and share this context with everybody here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to everyone who has spoken so far, because I already feel like I'm receiving so much knowledge, and I can already feel the love, and just, I really like how, I think it was in not in the Loom, but one of the emails, there was a quote that said that this is a brave space, not a safe space. And I actually really sat with that, and I just thought about how all these people coming together over something, such a common issue that we've faced. And I know that, you know, people have been talking about it for a long time. Like Yolanda said, you know, there's since before we even had the internet, people were having these discussions around Indigenous people and displaced persons who are facing very similar genocidal tactics that we Canadian Indigenous people have been facing for the past couple of years. And it really is, it's such a sad thing that unites us, but at the same time, it kind of breaks your heart a little bit more open to be able to receive even more love. At least that's been my experience. And I can really feel, I can already feel a lot of powerful energy here. And I'm just really excited to be here. I'm really grateful to Field for asking me to be here. I'm already feeling like, you know, I know it's not a safe space, but I'm already feeling safe. And I'm just really grateful to all the brave souls that are here right now doing the work and facing their fears, facing traumas. I know it's not easy, and that's what makes it a brave space. And I'm just really grateful to be able to learn from people all around the world today. Thank you.
Nyawagoa Gwen. I think that was really beautiful medicine too, to acknowledge how much it takes even to just witness this conversation. So I also want to say like a huge thank you to everybody who's tuning in and for taking your night here to learn and hold this with us. Next slide, please. Our final speaker being introduced today is Victoria Redsun. Victoria Redsun creates and walks through the world for intergenerational healing. They are Indigiqueer from the Dene and Nehito nations of Etinto, Reindeer Lake. Please correct me on your own introduction. They are dedicated to Indigenous sovereignty through art and education. They share teachings passed down for generations. Redsun works in community justice with frontline movements across Turtle Island. And Redsun's also one of my very dear friends, and we met under incredible circumstances, and I am so grateful that everybody here gets to meet Redsun today also.
Hi, thank you for having me, and Masi Cho to Field for inviting me. And yeah, we met from like a spreadsheet. I was living in Wet'suwet'en for a few years, and it was very tough. And there I really learned the meaning of solidarity, and it was very eye-opening as a Dene Sultane person to visit other nations across the world during like pre-COVID and during all the raids and everything. I saw the strength of our people and how we are all so similar, especially being Dene and the vastness of the language that I speak. I see all these different connections across the world, from even growing up in a Tagalog and Filipino household. I'm not Filipino, but I was brought up in that household where there was a lot of different ways of life, and I see now all of the different ways that we relate. And I'm kind of rambling. I didn't prepare much, but I'm just really happy to be here with all these different kinds of people, because I think it's one of the most important things that I've been taught as my time land defending across the world is it's an international fight of solidarity. And I'm just a young person. I'm only 22, but I've done a lot of reading of Black Panther movements, and that is one thing that is the biggest threat to all states across the world is international solidarity. And that's where I really like to focus, and I'm really grateful to be here. And I acknowledge all of the land's pain across the world, and who we are as a people is we're connected to the land. And I see everybody here has that connection to the land wherever they come from. And that pain definitely resides in our bodies. And I just want to acknowledge that and send healing to that. So thank you and happy solstice.
I am tearing up over here because just being in a room full of so many wonderful people and hearing us connecting to each other like family who've never spoken before. In my personal life, I literally just hung out with my cousins who I've known about my whole life, but we've never actually all spent time with each other. We were just doing puzzles with my grandma for the first time in 20 years, like right before this. And so this is just an extension of that. Like we're finally breaking down those colonial barriers and being able to talk with each other and connect with each other. All right, we're gonna start with the first question. I think that Yolanda already really introduced us in such a good way to being able to talk about this on the same page, because they are such huge questions. And basically at this point, every land on this earth has faced colonization at some point. I made a little joke earlier today. Well, it's not really a joke. Someone will find it funny. But if like colonization in East Asia had happened differently, my mom would be Muslim Dene instead of Muslim Chinese, just because of how it went. We're literally all connected, and we've all been impacted by like land theft and displacement. And if you go back, all our languages like come from a similar root. Anyway, so our first question is, and I would like to start with Chemi, based on how Yolanda started us off already. And then I would love to hear Red Sun and Gwen's input. What does solidarity look like between our communities?
I think first and foremost, it's important to understand the interconnected nature of this world, how we're all connected. And, you know, for me, as an activist, I've spoken to many youth across the world, and I'd say, you know, never underestimate the power of one. Like everyone can be part of the change, and sort of that's the way I've gone about most of my life. But what I've found throughout my years of living and actually unlearning and spending time with elders is that the most important, or where I personally draw my strength, is actually from community. It is the community that has made me who I am today. And, you know, I have vivid memories of the most recent action that I did, where two folks and I disrupted the Olympic torch ceremony in Greece. You know, I went through a lot of physical, strenuous situations, and 3 days in Greek jail. But there was never a moment leading up to that event, even after, where I felt alone. Even if it was in the midst of the dark and I couldn't see anything, because of the blessings, the prayers and support from community members and our community, I never felt alone. And so I wanted to say that. But when it comes to solidarity, I think it's, jumping onto what Yolanda had already mentioned about, it's showing up for each other and understanding the pain and love that we all have for each other, and understanding that the systems of violence that exist, be it colonial violence or white supremacy, all of these systems operate in the same way. We just heard the connection of the residential schools and how these indigenous communities were talking amongst each other. Right now, as we speak, the authoritarian state of China is currently implementing and actually has completed their 10-year project of implementing colonial boarding schools for young Tibetan children. So 80% of young Tibetan children from 6 to 8, that's about 800 to 900,000 children that are being stripped away from their families and being forced to attend these colonial boarding schools 5 to 6 days a week, and where they are no longer being taught their mother tongue language. They are being forced to forget their nomadic way of being that has protected the lands, the pastoral lands for millennials, for thousands of years. And it's happening right now as we speak. And, the issues that we are talking about finally here, about the unmarked graves, about how those systems still exist to create violence, and hold our indigenous children in these systems, be it like these welfare systems and such. Like, for me, living here is quite complex, because I see the future of where my people could go. And when we hear words of solidarity, or people standing up for what is right, sometimes I become skeptical, because, these things are continuing to happen across the world. So why aren't we doing anything? And so solidarity between the communities, I think it comes naturally. We understand each other's pain. So we just need to have more spaces of healing. And it's happening right now. And I hope that there will be more to come. But for others who do not understand, I think, it's time that we start being more being more critical of ourselves, because even our silence is an injustice. And I want to leave it at that.
I just want to say how horrifying that is happening in Tibet, because the weight that I feel in my community, in northern Manitoba, some of the first suicides in North America were Dene Cree men from my territory. And that was due to fur trade, and that was due to smallpox, all these things that seem so far away. But the rapid growth from these capitalist industries has made each one of us desensitized to these tragedies that are still very prominent. Sitting down with my granny on her bed and her showing me all the photos and naming each child beside her and hearing her cry and everything, it's so hard. And I want to let her know that there's thousands and millions of people who love her and will support her through anything. But in our communities in the North, it's very much like survival. Even now, like the caribou are our survival. the clean water that we drink from is our survival, and each other is our survival. And even though each one of us are hurting from all these different things that are continuing each and every day, I want to believe that that healing will come in time. And I feel like for me, I feel like I've been blessed by my grandmothers with the gift of even being able to travel. Like living here in Toronto and speaking with each one of you is something that a lot of my people won't ever experience, this international solidarity, and knowing that everyone across the world is standing together. I feel like it's still a work in progress in the North, and being a youth around all these older people, I really have to convince them that change needs to happen for these young children. And it's important now to continue mutual aid acts and to continue our traditional ways and continue our trade networks across the world, because that is really what keeps us alive. Like my uncle going out and hunting for the community is what keeps us alive. It's what keeps me alive. Even having access to these traditional foods, these elders told me that it will feed my spirit, even in these huge cities, forever. Like it'll feed me and it will help me keep going. And I believe that is why my people are still so strong, is because we have our food and our language. And even though we've all faced these things, like our ancestors are still like in solidarity with our survival. So yeah.
I guess I'll jump in next. Sorry, that actually made me so emotional hearing about children in Tibet, because obviously it's so close to the heart. It's kind of like we're going through, like Canada is trying to reconcile what they've done, and we as Indigenous people have known for a long time that going to Canada for healing is not the answer. And for myself personally, the way I kind of look at solidarity between myself and Indigenous people and refugees is the same way, or newcomers to Canada is the same way that I view my own relationship to other Indigenous communities. Myself being an Innu woman who is Innu on my father's side, and I do not know about my family. Innu people were the last Indigenous people to come back to or to leave to leave like colonization. We were the last to be colonized, so we're also the last to come back to our traditional ways. I went to visit my reservation for the first time last year, actually, and it was, or 2 years ago now. It was very, very eye-opening, and just like I can just see the trauma everywhere. It's a community rampant with addiction and suicide and all of these horrible things that Indigenous people are facing throughout Canada. And it's really taken me going to the Anishinaabe Health Toronto and connecting to other Indigenous people that way. Luckily, I've had friends who have come from this community, from the Native community since I was a kid. But when you're a child, you know, you're not very aware. And then as I got older, I realized I need this connection and I need to reach out to other Indigenous people. I've been very lucky to have gotten teachings from Anishinaabe, from Mohawk, from very tribes all over Tkaronto. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it's honestly opened my eyes to just see that, you know, we all have a common goal, like Indigenous people. We really are uniting in our solidarity now more than ever, because we've known it, but now we're really realizing that if we want to get these things done, if we want people to be educated in what's happening and what's been happening within Canada towards Indigenous people, then we need to educate them ourselves. And it is kind of disappointing because, you know, Canada's been talking for however long about how they're implementing all these programs and they're donating all this money to this cause and that. And it really is it just seems to be a lot of talk. So the fact that we're actually doing this now and having this conversation about Indigenous solidarity between newcomers and Indigenous folks is really important. And I think a lot of newcomers, like people even fleeing their own countries where there's like war and famine, a lot of the things that even just our own Indigenous people experience on reserves, it's like they come here and they're just shocked that this is even happening because, like, you know, Canada is presented as this wonderful country full of possibilities, like Shahinara, as it was talking about. So, you know, it's kind of eye-opening, and it's really just, I've come to this point where I'm like, okay, I need to, I know all this, I know about this stuff, I've lived this stuff, I need to be the one to, you know, just create this community for myself. And I do notice as well how newcomers to Toronto specifically, and I'm sure all throughout Canada, are just very pressured to assimilate into the Canadian culture. And if you're not able to do that, you're not really respected as a Canadian citizen. And I don't agree with that at all. So I'm glad that we're doing this. And I'm glad that the conversation is getting out and that people are interested in hearing these conversations. It makes me it just brings joy to my heart.
Thank you. Nyawagoa, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing, because everyone here has such a different perspective. And I'm really proud of the panel that we have here. I'm wondering if Yolanda would like to speak again, because in her intro, she introduced everything so wonderfully. And having heard the other three speakers, I would love to hear any updates or counter thoughts that she has.
Si tienes algunas ideas de lo que has escuchado y en esa como organizar en una manera como crear solidaridad entre las comunidades de migrantes y las comunidades indígenas aquí en Canadá y cómo se puede crear esa solidaridad. Tiene que hacer el unmute, llama.
Okay. Hay actividades que son prácticas, ¿no? Más allá de ya del hecho de identificarnos y reconocernos y aprender, ¿no?
There are practical activities beyond just recognizing and identifying. Yeah.
Una de ellas es, por ejemplo, identificar coincidencias de tradiciones espirituales y culturales.
One way is to not look just at the political, but also to identify coinciding spiritual and cultural traditions that are shared between Indigenous and newcomer groups.
Una lucha que tenemos en común, tanto migrantes como indígenas, es la lucha contra la apropiación cultural.
One big fight that both newcomers and Indigenous peoples face in their respective communities is the fight against cultural appropriation.
Y también podríamos hacer círculos de sanación que tengan que ver con la historia de cada uno de nosotros, que hemos vivido lo que está viviendo muchos de los survivors, lo hemos vivido a través de las historias de nuestros abuelos y bisabuelos.
Yeah, so like sharing circles or talking circles between survivors, especially given the fact that many people live that trauma intergenerationally. intergenerationally. So to be able to talk only not about the trauma that we faced in our sharing circle, but also to talk about the trauma that our parents and grandparents faced.
Así que me puedo parar. Voy a tratar de panear el vestido.
Ah, sí. So
No puedo.
she's, Yolanda's actually showing her traditional dress right now from her peoples.
Ay, no puedo. La luz no me ayuda. El símbolo. Maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe.
podemos ver.
Ok. Este es un traje que lo utilizamos como traje de gala o protocolar.
¿Traje de qué?
De gala o protocolar.
Okay.
Que es de etiqueta. De etiqueta.
Okay. So this is a dress that would be used in kind of like formal spaces, like an etiquette dress or like a formal dress.
Pero también significa un acto de resiliencia de las mujeres indígenas.
But it also signifies an act of resilience, the act of resilience of Indigenous women.
Que han sufrido violaciones todavía hasta el día de hoy. En la
Who are
cuenca amazónica.
suffering violations until today.
Sobre todo en el área amazónica de Sudamérica.
Especially in the Amazonian part of South America.
Y en la época colonial, los españoles y los franceses al violar tapaban a las mujeres con un manto después de violarlas.
¿Tapaban?
Las cubrían, like cover.
Okay. Oh, okay. So oftentimes during the colonial era, after
The French and Spaniards.
Yeah, like after basically violating or sexually assaulting Indigenous women in the Amazon, oftentimes the Spanish colonizers would cover the women with kinds of like dresses and things and dress them up, quote unquote.
Y lo que hicieron nuestros ancestros fue tomar esas telas con las que las cubrían y bordarle nuestros símbolos.
So the Indigenous women, what they did in response to that was they would take the materials, the cloth that was used to cover the women who had been violated, and then they took that cloth and then turned it into symbols of resistance by wearing clothing made out of the cloth that these women were covered in.
Para decir que estábamos por encima de tu acto de violación.
And that would indicate that we were above your act of violation.
También hay actividades culturales que nos identifican en común.
There are also cultural activities that identify all of us in common.
Más allá de los bailes y la música en los cuales hay muchas coincidencias.
Especially with music and dance, which you can often see across cultures that there is extensive coincidences and similarities.
Y hay que trabajar en eso, en conseguir atraer a las personas para que aprendan no solamente de un discurso histórico, sino de una realidad vivida.
So it's important, through those acts and through those similarities that then we interject and have conversations, not only about the history of what Indigenous peoples faced on Turtle Island and the Abya Yala, but also the lived realities that are still happening to this day.
Claro, y acercándonos, cada quien se va a dar cuenta de que tenemos problemas comunes.
And the closer we get to one another, the more we will realize that we actually face a common set of issues in the present day.
Y hay que aprovechar este momento en América Latina que hay un resurgimiento de la reivindicación de la identidad indígena.
And there's definitely an opportunity in this moment in Latin America to have that kind of discourse, because there is a revitalization of the Indigenous identity in Latin America, which presents an opportunity to also discuss Indigenous identity and Indigenous issues faced in the present day.
Y está avanzando la construcción de una identidad latinoamericana también.
And it also helps to construct, you know, a
Latin
more
American identity.
profound Latin American identity.
Sí, un ejemplo de acercamiento lo podemos ver con la cestería del noreste de Canadá. Es igual que la cestería del centro de la Amazonía.
¿Qué es cestería, chama?
Cestería basketry.
Oh, like basket weaving. Okay. So if you look at indigenous communities in North America, and then you look at indigenous communities in the Amazon, for example, the basket weaving methods are very similar, and the way that the baskets
The same. The
they're
same.
basically the same.
The same, the same. Igual que nos identificamos, por esa identificación nos puede ayudar a acercarnos a conversar sobre nuestros problemas.
And when you look at that similarity, the fact that those things are the same and you have that cultural sharing space, that opens up a more profound dialogue for people to discuss their problems and also find out that their problems are the same.
Yeah. Y abrazarnos mutuamente para sanarnos.
Yeah, and then to you know, hug each other and embrace each other so that you know, we can heal collectively.
No hablo más.
Okay. All right, Chica.
No more. No more.
Now I'll go Yolanda for sharing. I, in the chat, reposted Turtle Island's national inquiry to murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And it's really heartfelt from the families who share these stories. And it means so much to hear your culture's tradition of reclaiming your own power. The National Inquiry's final report is called Reclaiming Power in Place. And as well, Seb, if you could link in the chat to a Canadian, or it's an Indigenous art organization, has commissioned an Indigenous artist to do their own theatrical healing performance based on their reaction to every single chapter of the whole entire National Inquiry. So it's way more accessible if you aren't able to read it, because that's a lot of emotion. You can see their records of their, it's an audio and a theater performance. It should be on the Loom, and I'll link it if you can't find it. And I think it's really clear based on the conversations that have happened already that the Indigenous struggle all over the whole world, like if someone's coming here to escape from something, it is happening here. It's just been way hidden by the Canadian state and the structures of colonization. And I'm excited to have Gwen here. I mean, everybody, but Gwen and I grew up in the same city. Toronto is such a veiled place. Even if you live in different neighborhoods, you're never gonna know that the stuff that you hear about, the horrors of other countries, are literally happening down the street on another block, but you're separated by train tracks or a hill. Like, so one of my most anxious moments is like being in an Uber or something and somebody's like, so where are you from? And I have to be like, I'm from here, I'm from Toronto. They're like, where's your accent from? I'm like, I don't think I have an accent. And then if I say my family's from Six Nations, they're like, what is that? I'm like, oh, it's, you know, it's the res. It's like right over there. Like, what is that? And the conversations are always, wow, I had no idea. Wow, I did not know. And I think most of the folks on this call do have some idea already and do show up already. Like, I know that Chemi and Red Sun, you've like put your body and your freedom on the line to fight for your people and everybody. And I want to bring attention. Well, my next questions on my list are, what don't settlers or other settlers know about your experience? And what are the similarities in our communities and efforts, which I think we've already covered. And so I would like instead to ask the question of, for folks who are really just learning this for the first time, and maybe their families are generations under colonization or assimilation, and they're coming here and they really don't have any idea, what are those points of connection that we can have and just lovingly show up for each other? Because I don't think the front lines are for everybody, even though I've personally found the most amount of connection in family, like Chemi was saying, and even Red Sun, like that's my family. And also just breaking down those barriers so that when we meet each other and greet each other, we know that we've gone through the same things, even if it's from completely different directions and we have completely different reactions. And also just like, how do we meet people? This is a long question. How do we meet people where they're at if our families have lived with this for generations and it's not news to us? And to somebody, maybe their family did go through this, such as like my mom, her family was colonized in my grandpa's generation. They were displaced from their land and put basically on a reservation in China. But because of how the structure of the government there works, she grew up basically not knowing. And it's so weird to hear my grandma who's Haudenosaunee and my mom talk about their childhoods, because my mom talks about the same circumstances that my grandma faced on the res, but she talks about them kind of with like fun and nostalgia. She's like, yeah, we didn't have running water or electricity. Sometimes we went to the city for that. Yep, that's my question. I would like to start with Gwen, considering that we both grew up in a very huge multicultural city where we're not necessarily grounded in our own Indigenous communities, and we're learning about that from a really similar point as newcomers, if that makes sense. Let me know if you need clarification. I'm just blown away by everybody sharing.
I was gonna ask for a little, just a little bit more clarification. Just, I know like you did say it really well, but just what, like kind of, is it how I'm staying connected in the city, or just what exactly do you want me to
if
speak
someone
on?
else wants to speak on as well, if it made more sense to them, that's great, because I don't, but basically how, as you learn more about your culture and you're hearing about other people's approaches to learning about what it is to be Indigenous, having grown up in such a giant multicultural city where everybody has come from different backgrounds and you never know what someone's been through in their life, how do you make those connections with people?
Okay. I think ever since, so I first, I started like learning about it in an actual education structure of Canada, which was at U of T. I took a Indigenous Studies course, and I was 22 at the time. That's when I really started to like not only feel comfortable speaking about what was happening in my community, like in the Innu community, and also just in Tkaronto and what's going on here, how we don't even, like a lot of people aren't even aware of the land that they actually live on, and the peoples that lived on the land before it was known as Tkaronto. So once I started going to school, I started feeling like it was more of an obligation for me to kind of talk about these things. And I found that through just being more transparent, you said that you could even be in an Uber and someone just says like, where are you from? It's about not shrinking when we hear things or questions that make us uncomfortable, and realizing that no, we do have a place, and more than a place, it's kind of it's right and almost like an obligation, if you feel called to it, to speak about where we're from. And I mean, if someone asks and we feel comfortable, because you should always feel comfortable sharing with the person as well. Like, I think it's very, very beneficial to open up in that way, obviously in safe spaces. And in those cases where I've opened up and sometimes been like, oh, I don't know how this person is going to respond, they actually are able to connect to me in different ways. And even I had a really good friend. She was she's from Syria, but she left when she was like 5 years old. And just even the conversations that we had, I actually met her in that Indigenous studies course. And within that Indigenous studies course, I was the only Indigenous person of Canada. And that was kind of awkward for me. Like, I felt like I felt out of place in an Indigenous studies course. And once I started opening up more and sharing my story, my personal story, I found that it was a lot easier to connect to the other people in the class, and they were making space for me, which really, I really appreciated that, because there was just so much going on. That was a very traumatizing time for me to learn about all of that stuff. All of the colonizational, the colonized colonialism that's happened in Canada, to learn about it in the span of less than a year, back to back, was very intense. And to have that support and space from other individuals who have also experienced similar things coming to Canada from other places. There was a woman from Ethiopia, you know, these people were really from everywhere. And that made me feel really comfortable, because we were able to connect in these ways. And like Yolanda said, it's not just about politics. You know, yes, we are political just by existing, pretty much. But that doesn't mean that it needs to be, it's not all about that, you know, the connection to the connection that Indigenous peoples have all over the world is such a sacred thing. And I think it really needs, it needs to be a holistic thing, that we need to look at, okay, how are we going to heal spiritually, emotionally, physically, and mentally, because it's all connected, just like we are all connected throughout the world. I hope that so I think just opening up more when I feel comfortable, and knowing it's a safe space, that's really opened the line for me to be able to connect to other people that are facing similar issues. And it's really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. That really touched my heart, and I could really relate too. And I'm so grateful that you're able to share your experiences here with everybody. I'd love to hear next from Red Sun, who you grew up really connected to your culture, and then you have lived in the big cities in Manitoba, and you have a bunch of younger siblings who are going through a bunch of learning as well. Sorry to tell people about you, I don't know, but.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Thompson, Manitoba, and that's a very isolated town. And I guess my first interaction with people, I guess, other than me, because I grew up around my family. Thompson is a very like Dene Cree community. It's the only town in the north of Manitoba, and that's where everybody from all these isolated reserves gather to. So being around only Indigenous people, and I had like a white grandfather, but I didn't know that he was white. I just thought he was Dene. But I remember my first time seeing a Black person, and I asked my mom, I was like, who is that? And I didn't know at the time like who other people were. I didn't really have that much exposure with television and media and things like that. So my mom gently explained to me who other people were of different races and cultures. And so I grew up in that setting, not in a huge metropolis, multicultural setting where I live now. And now I think about all these different memories that I have of living in Winnipeg and going to high school there. It was mostly Somali and Indigenous people in the high school that I went to. And I would just like hang out with the Somali people because all the white people were so racist, and it was a lot of Jewish people as well. So they're also very much raised in this anti-Semitic worldview. And they put that onto me, of course, and my peers. So hanging out with these different Somali people, I was explaining to them what I would do outside of school. So I would go to all these different art galleries and explore all these different artists from around the world. And art is really what brought me into, I guess, what you would call activism. And it brought me into all these different ways of knowing through going to galleries and seeing sculptures. It was a way that I can understand all these different points of view. And as an artist, now I see the importance of all these different narratives and all these different medias. It speaks to so many people across the world, and even the Thunderbird woman and the eagle and how it's depicted, you feel it. And it's just a simple doodle, which Isaac Murdoch calls it. But through these arts and through these artists, we explore these different prophecies. And one of these prophecies is the eagle and condor prophecy that has emerged so greatly now, where it's like in between South America and North America, we come in solidarity. And these are things that were prophesized thousands of years ago, and they're coming into light now. And there's all these other different prophecies talking about how we need to come together for humanity. And it's not an option, it's absolutely essential that we understand each other as much as we can, and we come together and we fight against these global injustices, and we take care of each other as kin. And living in the city is really what brought me to that conclusion, is we need to take care of each other. And I was in Vancouver for a long time mourning the death of my friend, and it was other people like who were taking care of me, who I barely knew, but came to come like to such a beautiful relationship, this kinship where we take care of each other in these horrible times. And it's really what keeps us alive. And through arts and education and through all these different mediums that people are brought into, that's where we really find that solidarity. And yeah, I always bring my siblings to those different rallies and everything like that. So they're pretty rowdy kids. And I love them for that. And I see these new generations like becoming even rowdier than we are, and becoming so highly educated and seeing each other and embracing the uniqueness of each of our cultures, which Yolanda was saying is each one of us has different regalia and songs and poetry and stories and prophecies. And that's really what brings us together. Just like when I see other people with tattoos, face tattoos, I'm like, wow, like that is incredible, because these things were like literally cut off our faces. And yeah, I've tattooed a lot of different people, and I've been tattooed by mostly other Indigenous people, mostly other Dene people. And I like keeping it in that I guess like home, like a family, like having other Dene people revitalize these tattoos and these songs and these poems really brings us together. Because when I see other like Innu people, or I see Wet'suwet'en people, or I see Maori people, we all have our own different tattoos. And I think seeing those in these huge cities like really is like such an important form of resistance, because it's the way that we connect with our ancestors. For me, it's like when we go see our ancestors and when we pass on, that's the way they identify us in the spirit world. They see our tattoos, they stay on our face, they stay on our bodies when we pass on. And I know a lot of Inuk have those same kind of teachings where it's like, why are you naked? Like, I've like heard jokes about that, like from, I guess, ancestors, not like just stories, like ancestors asking like, why is your face naked? And they'll ask you why. And I watched this movie called Warriors of the Rainbow, and I suggest to watch that, but it's an incredible film. Like it's a beautiful piece of art. And I watched it in Wet'suwet'en with like Tagalog people. I'll try to find the link after I talk about this, but it talks about the importance of tattoos and solidarity. And even within nations, we find these separations in our clans and in our families. And I think that's where we really need to start, is by creating that connection between our own family and chosen family, of course, and other, as being two-spirit, like other two-spirit people, those are the people that keep me alive. And there's all these different ways of relatability, and even with all of us here today, I find that as well, to the same kind of degree, tattoos and art and family and queerness. But yeah, I went all over the place with that, but I'll pass it on to whoever wants to go next.
I'd like to ask Chemi and probably Yolanda the closing question, because Gwen and Red Sun just spoke about how connecting to their own, like we are on their lands right now. They're connected to their ancestral body. And so many newcomers come here, like, and they've been here for a year, even like, you know, my mom's been here for 20 years and her community is like her workplace, you know, like how do you, Red Sun just said, you know, your chosen family, when you come here, you may not even know how to speak the same language as everybody. How do you stay connected to your own culture without, maybe you've even already been assimilated before you get here. How do you make that connection and reconnect with your spiritual and emotional self? In my head, this question was more concise. I feel like you understand what I'm saying. You know, when you can't connect with your own homelands and you do have such a beautiful culture, and how do you find that community and build that love? And that's the closing question.
Thank you, Field. Thank you, everyone. There's so much love and courage and wisdom here. I'm very grateful to be here. For me, you know, so much of my identity is actually built upon the idea of being a stateless person. I was born in exile in South India. I grew up amongst Tamil kids, or Tamil kids, sorry. And I had to learn English, Hindi, Tamil to be able to survive. And I wasn't able to learn my own language. And for all my life, I've never actually been in a place where the majority of the people were my own people, and where Tibetan was spoken. And I've always yearned for a home that I've never seen, and that continues to change as we speak. And so even the ideas of home that I have is actually very much far from the truth, and is very much romanticized, and it's tainted with Western concepts of what, you know, the homeland looks like, the mountains, the snow mountains. So for me, you know, navigating this space has always been very complex, of coming from stolen land and then being on stolen land and taking up space. So I think one thing that I always think about is, due to the relationship the state has had with the original caretakers of this land, the role of non-Indigenous person, settlers or immigrants, people like me, there's a dire need for us to understand and grasp the problem at its root, understand the nature of oppression, how it in the most insidious and subtle ways actually affects us, and it does something to our minds. It shifts the way we think about even ourselves. And so that calls for more spaces of learning, unlearning, moving and healing, and moving towards clarity and resilience. And so, you know, existence is resistance, yes, but how are we also, as non-Indigenous communities on Turtle Island, how are we complicit? And so in order to know that, I think for me, it was very important to know who I was personally. Like, who are we as people? Who are our families? Who are our communities? And so without working to build our core identity, igniting our self-worth, having the awareness to be accountable, it's going to be a challenge to be able to build a better world. And we are interconnected, and that has already been spoken on so much. And as interconnected, we are all, our pain is also interconnected, and so are the solutions. And the solutions to me lie in uniting and coming together. And I just also wanted to share, the spiritual head of my people is the Dalai Lama. And when he had first visited Turtle Island, so-called North America, or at least North America, the first time in like 1979, he was greeted by the Hopi elders, and the spiritual leaders only agreed to speak in their own native tongues. And then through the interpreter, we found out that the first words that were spoken to by the Hopi elders to the Dalai Lama was "Welcome home." We have so many connections, from dancing in circles, holding hands, the importance of elements, the water. Tibet is known as the rooftop of the world, but also has the water source for about 1.5 billion people in the world. The snow mountains, the connections that I've had with Dene leaders and organizers when I'm in so-called the States is ridiculous, because the conversations that we have about our grandparents, face tattoos, we call ourselves the Redskins. There's so many connections, from turquoise, the use of sage, the use of traditional medicines. And so for me, it goes back to the question of, who are we? What is our role? And so it is hard as someone that has been displaced many, many times, and actually still has no answer to you when you ask me where is home, because I don't know. However, if that is in the large scale of things, that I don't have an actual answer for you what home looks like. But on an everyday basis, if you ask me home, I find home everywhere I go. And today I found home here. And so I'm very grateful. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Chemi, for sharing that. And I just see in the chats, some folks are saying my culture has that too, welcome home. And so now I would love to move into the breakout room portion so that we can talk to each other and build these connections and communities going forward. And I'm not sure who I pass it to do that. So whoever's introducing the breakout rooms.
To Sebastian. Thanks, Phil.
Hi, everybody. I'm just gonna wait to get the slides up. One second. Ana Teresa, do you want me to put them up? Or okay, you got it. Okay, so how we're gonna do it is we're gonna take some of this space. So as you know, the event only goes until 8 p.m., but actually we will just keep it open, the breakout rooms, if folks want to keep talking. Some of the facilitators will stay past 8 if the conversation is really igniting. So we'll just leave that space kind of open for folks to chat. There's 3 different breakout rooms. One of them is a conversation cafe. This is just a really open space to just kind of discuss, talk about how your experience was, participating and listening in on this panel. And then just, connect with one another, whatever that looks like, so that we can all stay in touch. The second room will be a guided conversation. This will have more concrete, moderated, facilitated questions to really get down to the profoundness of the question of how do we, connect with one another, and how do we build this solidarity, and how do we co-organize as Indigenous folks and newcomers. And then the third room will just be a chill space. So there's gonna be just some art there, some music, like a documentary playing, and that the facilitators there in that breakout room will also just keep resharing the resources that Field had shared today of the links. So you can just take that time to kind of read those links. Magdalena, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you can navigate amongst, or once you choose, you're there.
Yeah. So you'll be able to go back and forth between rooms as well. So if you want to spend, if you need the first 5 minutes to kind of hang out in the chill space, but then you do want to get into the conversation portion, you're completely able to do that. So there is going to be a pop-up window appearing soon with the 3 breakout rooms. And it'll just be a prompt directing you to go into the one of your choice. And by the way, for breakout room 2, those were the questions. Oh yeah, we can go over the Zoom overview. Oh, no, they're going back. Okay. So the guided conversation, these are the questions that we're gonna try and get to the root of. And then, probably just on social media or something like that, kind of discuss at a later date, what were the outcomes of some of those, conversations. So now we can go to the Zoom etiquette. So some of you guys have noticed that for security purposes, just because our organization has been hit with a lot of Zoom bombers, that we had actually turned off the capabilities for non-co-hosts to unmute or turn on their video. So right now I'm going to allow that to happen. So as of now, you'll be able to, right? Yeah, so you'll be able to show your video and unmute yourselves. Okay, and there you will now be able to participate in the conversations and in those breakout rooms. So here's some Zoom overview, just how to mute and unmute yourself, pressing the mute button. And then for turning on and off camera, same thing, just stop video, start video, and then renaming yourselves. If you need to do that, I'll turn on that capability too. And then in the chat box is always great, especially when people are talking, using that as the primary space to kind of communicate so that you're not interrupting somebody. And then try your best, when trying to answer a question or to give your insight, to just use the raise and lower hand feature, which is in the reactions tab. And there you can also put a bunch of cute other reactions, such as like the laughing emoji, the thumbs up emoji, etc. So yeah, let's open up the breakout rooms now. So you should see on the bottom right a prompt to join the breakout room. And then Teresa, if you just want to go back to the previous slide, which shows what the 3 breakout rooms are. Yeah, that one. And then folks can, scurry into the breakout rooms.